As I have been working through the MAT program here at Westminster, an increasing amount of issues in our education system has come to my attention. A couple big points that I want to speak on are the current funding of schools and the idea of not just teaching to the test, but teaching which benefits the whole child. In addition, I will compare these to the education system that Finland has in place. Let's first look at the issues of funding here in the United States. School funding is how the money that comes from both federal and state sources is distributed to school districts and used by schools throughout various states. As explained by L. Dean Webb, Arlene Metha, and K. Forbes Jordan, the public policy goals of finance in schools with various states are viewed as being equity, adequacy, and choice. Of these three policy goals, only one of them seems to be acted upon regularly. That goal is choice. The other two goals, equity and adequacy, are not being acted upon as readily. Webb, Metha, and Jordan further explain equity is the equal treatment of people under equal circumstances, and adequacy is the extent to which school funding is sufficient to provide the programs and services that are required by the students. With regards to equity in school funding, areas that have greater property taxes have more money flowing into the schools to help with various programs that the school can offer. The areas that have lower property taxes do not have the funding to offer their students the same opportunities as those who live in areas with higher property taxes. This type of school funding negatively affects working class students, students of color, and students who are English language learners. These three student populations are groups that usually live in areas with the lower property taxes and in turn have less money flowing into their schools. In this nation, the adequacy of school funding is not enough to support and provide programs for all students to excel. Funding supports opportunities such as quality teachers, smaller class sizes, and instructional materials, which can and do make a difference to children in schools and classrooms, as stated by Prudence L. Carter and Kevin G. Wellner. According to Diane Ravitch, teachers statistically account for around 10 to 20% of achievement outcomes. This is a critical point to remember. If we do not have high-quality teachers teaching students, how can we expect our students to improve? Linnell Hancock explains that in Finland, professionals are selected from the top 10% of the nation's graduates to earn a required master's degree in education. Diane Ravitch states that, quote, any Finnish educator will say that Finland improved its public education system not by prioritizing its schools or constantly testing its students, but by investing in the preparation, support, and retention of excellent teachers. Requiring teachers here in the United States to earn a master's degree could help our students have a higher quality education through just as high of quality instruction. Jonathan Kozol states that due to a lack of funding, lower performing schools are required to follow a federally mandated curriculum and pedagogy. He further discusses how schools similar to PS 65 have had to resort to using pedagogy consisting of direct command and absolute control, not providing a supportive learning environment for students. He goes on to point out that the high turnover of teachers in schools which use this type of pedagogy leads to instability within the classroom. Julie Bosland, Tanya Rucker, Marjorie D. Cohen, Laura Fisher, and Jonathan Rogers state that the lack of funding does not allow for early childhood education for students. This further puts students of the working class, students of color, and English language learners at a disadvantage. These student populations are not able to attend early childhood education programs as those who are from more affluent communities can. This leads to another inequality in education. Linda Darling Hammond states that funding gaps are linked to opportunity gaps. This can affect achievement and ultimately affect life successes. Rachel R. Ostrander explains that the disparity between schools will grow as inadequately educated people will remain in the same geographic areas with low property values and send their children to underfunded schools, virtually perpetuating the issue with funding. Depleted school funding is neither equitable nor adequate to educate the various student populations that the nation has the responsibility to educate. Looking at the issues in school funding, let's now discuss ways that this can be reformed. Gloria Ladson-Billings states that higher institutions of education gain their funding from not only the state, but also from alumni, the federal government, private foundations, and individual donors. She also explains that by using multiple streams of funding, there are multiple accountability systems to ensure that the schools are using the money wisely and how the donors intended the money to be used. Ladson Billings further explains that applying this method to public K-12 schools can be done by tapping into and utilizing the alumni support that each school has built over its lifetime. This is crucial to giving schools the needed funding to provide for all student populations. Linda Darling Hammond suggests that through the use of multiple streams of funding, there will be a greater ability to care for the needs of the nation's children in areas such as healthcare, housing, food, and provide high-quality early childhood care. She further explains that by doing this, students will be provided with a greater chance of academic achievement in K-12 schools and into higher education. This change will be in the hands of the schools to ensure that the funding is distributed to the community with the goal of aiding students with their needs. The school districts in the state will be the institutions responsible for implementing the change in the distribution of these funds. Linda Darling Hammond discusses how countries who are more educationally focused have school funding that is aimed at giving more money to schools that serve new immigrants, as well as schools that teach students who are from lower income backgrounds. Finland, for example, is a country that provides such funding as explained by Linnell Hancock. Providing for this type of funding will allow students to have a high-quality education regardless of where they live. Multiple streams of income can provide this type of funding distribution to schools. Further, Linda Darling Hammond explains that multiple streams of funding will allow schools to distribute the funding that they receive, which will further help to build a greater educator workforce. Pedro Noguera suggests that in addition to building a greater workforce, multiple streams of income will provide for the funding of professionalism, allowing for a greater push toward having good, high-quality teachers in all schools. Funding schools equitably will level the playing field for all students within the United States. Allowing for all students to be on a level playing field will give all students the opportunity to have a high-quality education and to have an opportunity to participate in extracurricular activities. Dr. Laurie DeSaltos explains that, quote, in the mid-1950s, humanistic psychologist Abraham Maslow created a theory of basic, psychological, and self-fulfillment needs that motivate individuals to move consciously or subconsciously through levels or tiers based on our inner and outer satisfaction of those met or unmet needs, close quote. In order for one to move up a tier within Maslow's hierarchy of needs, one must have the lowest tiers satisfied. These tiers consist of physiological and safety needs, as well as needs of belongingness and love. In locations where students do not have these lower tiers fulfilled, they will not be able to. In locations where students do not have these lower tiers fulfilled, they are not able to move up in the hierarchy, stunting their ability to perform well in school. Linnell Hancock states that Finland schools provide food, medical care, counseling, and taxi service if needed. They also provide free student health care. Diane Ravitch states that, quote, Finland has strengthened its social welfare programs for children and families, close quote. This is fulfilling all the students' needs and is focusing on the whole child, allowing students to move into the higher tiers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have a similar school system here in the United States. This school system is the Harlem Children's Zone. The Harlem Children's Zone provides food, medical care, and housing for those who need it. Their fact sheet states that, quote, because what happens in the classroom is affected by what happens outside the classroom, we address any barrier to a child's academic success, whether it is healthcare, a chaotic home life, or the complexities of a college application process, close quote. In my opinion, the rest of the American education system should adapt this type of care for children. If this change occurs, we can provide our students with a better education in which they can compete with other first world countries. Sonia Nieto and Patty Baudet explain that the majority of the current curriculum content is neglecting students' life experiences rather than building on them to expand their existing understanding of the world. Because of this, students of color have been inclined to leave behind their linguistic, cultural, and familiar resources in order to succeed in U.S. public schools, as stated by Maria del Carmen Salazar. Jim Cummins explains that students of color are continually being asked to replace their culture and to assimilate themselves to mainstream values and practices. Maria del Carmen Salazar explains that this approach to curriculum ultimately robs students of their culture, language, history, and values, thus denying students their humanity. Therefore, a non-multicultural approach to curriculum is a significant disadvantage to students. Sonia Nieto and Patty Bowe discuss that the curriculum taught signifies to students what knowledge they and their communities value and the prestige it has within the educational establishment and beyond. Rachel R. Ostrander discusses that schools are the institutions that teach our children democratic ideals, enable our children to be successful and productive citizens, and teach them moral and community responsibility. Sonia Nieto discusses that multicultural education is sometimes seen more as a way to promote self-esteem. Nieto also suggests that when this occurs, the result may be that there are students who have a higher self-esteem, a knowledge of and comfort in their heritage, but lack in skills that will prepare them for life. On the other hand, if the curriculum lacks multicultural education, the result may be students who excel in the core subjects of English, math, and science, but do not have an awareness of or confidence in their heritage. Maria del Carmen Salazar states that educators are required to use a one-size-fits-all paradigm. Maria Franquez and Maria del Carmen Salazar explain that high-stakes standardized tests and district-mandated instructional curriculum and restrictive educational policies limit educators from developing humanistic approaches. This method, in which the curriculum is being taught and tested, is not beneficial to the majority of student populations. Sonia Nieto describes the fact that when you walk into a school, there's a separate and distinct feeling that separates the school from the community. This fact does not foster a great learning environment for the majority of students. Nieto goes on to explain that holidays celebrated by non-Christian denominations are not a focus in the curriculum. She also gives the example of the food and how it is not unusual for students to describe a fictitious breakfast to please their teacher because they are ashamed of what they actually ate or don't eat while at home. Michael Gavin explains that the culture involves the rights of people. These are the rights of language, religion, ways of dress, etc. He also explains that culture means looking at thousands of ways of doing something or of viewing something. It is not static but belongs to people and is constantly changing. Gavin further argues that there is an imbalance within the cultures of schools that exist in the United States. He also points out that lessons are embedded in culture, and that in the United States the curriculum taught is embedded in one mainstream culture. Gavin states that there is a great need to level the playing field and incorporate respect for and uphold the cultures and rights of indigenous people and embrace multiple ways of thinking and speaking. To implement this, we need to look to teachers and state standards. Linda Darling-Hammond says that less strict and more open curriculum standards from the state would allow educators to supplement the curriculum within their collaborative teams and their classrooms to suit the needs of the students of that particular school. This will further allow teachers to form curriculum that is multicultural and best fits the students of an individual school and classroom. Darling-Hammond suggests using a curriculum that is focused around higher order thinking and performance skills, a curriculum that is rich with the arts, physical fitness, social sciences, civics, sciences, language arts, and multiple foreign languages. She also suggests getting rid of high-stakes testing and using open-ended assessments such as essays, projects, and problem sets, and using these assessments as thoughtful and expansive ways to promote improvement, not as a punishment. Finland's students rank higher than the U.S. in all aspects of education, higher science test scores in comparison to the U.S. So what are they doing that we aren't? Diane Ravitch points out that Finland has a national curriculum which is not restricted to the basic skills of reading and math, but includes the arts, sciences, history, foreign languages, and other subjects that are essential to a good, rounded education. There are no mandated standardized tests in Finland, apart from one exam at the end of a student's senior year in high school. Linnell Hancock states that there are no rankings, no comparisons, or competition between students, schools, or regions. As seen in the statistics, many benefits have risen from this form of curriculum design. Linda Darling Hammond discusses how using open-ended assessments will allow educators to evaluate students on their abilities, such as analyzing information or conducting a scientific experiment and writing the findings in a scientific manner. She goes on to explain that this type of evaluation will allow educators to encourage the students to hold on to their heritage and to use their creativity instead of taking a test or using a curriculum that is one size fits all. Further, open-ended assessments and a move towards an open curriculum will give students the building blocks of an education, allowing them to be aware that they have the right to learn. In addition, this will prepare students for college and future careers while also preparing them to deal with the demands of the 21st century as explained by Linda Darling Hammond. Ultimately, we need to look at other countries and compare what is and isn't working for their education systems in the way of funding and curriculum and adapt it the best way possible to the educational system here in the U.S.